All right, welcome to day 4. We are glad to be here, aren't we? Yeah, okay. Let's talk about a little bit of review. Let's look at a a chart. I recommended that you make your own. After we learn material, I recommended that you, without looking at your notes, try to replicate the various lists and charts that we cover, that we talk about in class. So let's do that right now from the freehold estates category. Freehold estates. Remember, freehold is, one second, there we go. Freehold means ownership as opposed to renting. You own it, you don't rent it. A rental estate would be a non-freehold estate. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about a non, that's for renters. We're talking about for owning. Freehold means owning. And so the categories were inheritable. Inheritable. If you remember the chart we put together, inheritable was on the left. The type of freehold estate that is the best possible type of ownership. Best possible if you could pick. Your best possible one is fee simple absolute. It means you have complete control over that property. There's no conditions that you need to adhere to. You bought it from the owner without having to make any promises to the owner. You did not have to promise them that you would never use it as a thing or that you would always use it as something. You can just do with it as you please. Fee simple absolute is absolutely the best possible way to own a property. The next one was fee simple defeasible. The first weird legal term that we saw, defeasible. And remember, when you see that word defeasible, think about the word defeat. Defeatable. Because these two types of defeasible estates are defeatable. Fee simple, defeasible, determinable means you must keep using it as a thing. Must keep using it in a certain way. When you buy that property from someone in a fee simple, defeasible, determinable type of ownership, you have to keep using it in a certain way, like you must keep using it as a church or as a farm. The other one was fee simple, determined, defeasible, subject to a condition, subsequent. Subject to a condition, subsequent. And the thing about this type is that you're promising to not use it in a certain way. You'll never use it to serve alcohol, for instance. So they were both types of defeasible. Both of these are types of fee simple, defeasible. Then the other inheritable type of estate was a pour aut vie or pour autre vie, which means for the life of another. And with this, there were some terms, some more terminology. There is a measuring life. There is a life tenant. And then, depending on what happens once the measuring life is gone, is no longer with us, one of these two things is going to happen. It's either going to revert back to the one that you bought it from, or it's going to go to a third party called a remainderman. That remainderman could even be a charity, for instance. The measuring life in a pour aut vie situation is different than the life tenant. It's for the life of another. It's a different person than the one who gets to use it, than the one who bought it or received it. That's why it's inheritable. Because if the measuring life person dies, then the life tenant no longer has the property. That's the whole point. And what happens if the measuring life person dies? It's either going to revert back to the seller, them or their estate, or it's going to go to another third party, a whole different person. Could be a person, could be an entity, could be a charity. Now, what if the measuring life doesn't die first, but the person that dies first is the life tenant? What if the life tenant is the one who dies? Measuring life's still alive. Well, the life tenant might have some heirs. They could leave this estate, this property, to their own heirs. But those heirs can't be too particularly happy. It's not as happy as they would be if it were a fee simple absolute, because they're going to realize, oh, wait, I just got this property from my dad who died, but I'm only going to get to have it as long as that measuring life person is alive. Estate for the life of another. If the life tenant dies, it goes to their heirs. It is inheritable, but only for as long as that measuring life is still around, right? What can the life tenant do with the property while they are alive and while they own it? They can sell it. They could lease it to someone. They could maybe even get a mortgage for it, or get some money, borrow against it, pull the equity out, but only as long as that bank or that person they rent it to or that person they sell it to understands that what they're renting, what they're buying, or what they're loaning money against can all go away once a measuring life person dies. Now, you probably won't have much luck finding a bank willing to give you money against the equity in that house in a life estate situation. But theoretically, legally, it can happen if you can find a willing participant. And whoever you might rent it to would have to understand, look, you might have to leave if that measuring life person dies. So that's the ins and outs of the Pour Alt V for the life of another. Then we're done with inheritable types of freehold estates. Now we're going to go look at the not inheritable types of freehold estates. Let's change the color. These are non-inheritable. There's only two of them. One of them is very much like Pour Alt V. It is another life estate. It's called a conventional life estate. It too has those same players in the mix. It also has a measuring life and a life tenant. It also has the reversionary thing or the remainderman, depending on what happens when the measuring life person dies. All of that still applies. The only difference here is that the measuring life and the life tenant is the same person when it's a conventional life estate. You get to use it for as long as you yourself, the life tenant, are alive. You get to use it. But when you die, you can't leave it to your heirs. That's what makes it non-inheritable, because your lifespan was what it depended on. So when you die, it's going to go either back to the one who sold it to you, reversionary, revert back, or it's going to go to a third party remainderman, right? And then the last type of freehold estate was the other non-inheritable kind. Let me make some room here. And that was a marital life estate. Marital life estate. And what we're talking about here is that if a spouse tries to either leave their surviving spouse out of the will completely or tries to give them a very little amount of money that's almost embarrassingly low, the law of North Carolina says the marital life estate provision says that you can't do that. Your spouse can't just cut you out of the will altogether or leave you lower than a certain amount. There's a chart. There's a formula. For the certain number of years you've been together, you're entitled to a certain percentage of the deceased's estate. And so we don't need to know what that chart is. You can Google it if you're curious. We don't have to cover that for our math or for our exam here, but just know that that's what a marital life estate is talking about. Okay, now let's get into the rest of chapter 2. We've got a good bit more to cover for chapter 2, and then we're going to go ahead and get on into 3 and into 4. Those will go faster. 3 and 4 will go faster, so don't you worry. We're going to get that covered. Let me talk to you in a little bit of a different way here. Okay. There we go. Now, encumbrances. We left off talking about encumbrances. An encumbrance is something that attaches to real estate. It is a burden on the real estate. It affects the title to the real estate. It is a right held by somebody that is not the owner. The person who has the right of the encumbrance is not the owner. They don't have an ownership interest. It also could affect the way you can use the property or the value of the property. We'll talk about how that could happen in a minute. It also does not keep a seller from selling the property. Even though it has an encumbrance on it, they could still sell it as long as they informed the person buying it that it has an encumbrance. So it doesn't prevent the transfer of title. That's what that means. So the first kind of encumbrance we're going to talk about is a lien. A lien. All liens are encumbrances, but not all encumbrances are liens. What does this mean? It means that liens are a type of encumbrance, but there are other types of encumbrances too. Liens are the one we're going to talk about first, and it means that you owe somebody something and you didn't pay it, and therefore they put a lien against your property so that when you ever do sell your property, that lien is going to be paid off. That person to whom you owe money is going to get their money from the proceeds of the sale of the property. You couldn't just sell the property and take all the proceeds and never pay them back and then just go away and disappear. Not going to happen if there's a lien attached to the property, because the closing attorney is going to see, oh, there are liens attached here. We need to pay these different people who have liens against your property. You're not going to get $300,000 proceeds from the sale of your property. You're going to get the $300,000 after we subtract 50 to this person, another 20 to this other person, anybody who has a lien. So you might actually only get 150 or 200,000 after you pay off all those liens that are attached. Some terminology. These are other types of encumbrances. We know that liens are included. Also, easements. An easement can be an encumbrance or a burden to the property because that property owner that has an easement across their property has to give access to the one who owns the easement. Therefore, it's a burden on the property or on them. And an encroachment is another type of encumbrance. An encroachment, I look at the word roach because it's gross, it's negative, it's a bad thing, and an encroachment is gross and negative and bad too. We are not happy when we see encroachments because that means something is crossing a property line. The neighbor has a garage, a detached garage that is over the property line, and the corner of it is on your land. Or your driveway was poured incorrectly. You didn't have a survey done, and when you poured the driveway, it got poured, part of it, over the property line onto the neighbor's land. And it's encroaching on their land, and that's a problem. Because now you've got to get their permission. You have to get maybe even buy that piece that it's encroaching over if they're willing to sell it. It's a big issue. It puts a cloud on the title of both your property and theirs. Other types of encumbrances are deed restrictions, restrictive covenants. These are things that say what you can do with the property. These are burdens on your property. Another thing is a lis pendens we'll be looking at, or a writ of attachment or pending lawsuits. All of these things are encumbrances on your property. There are a couple of different types of liens. There's the happy kind and the sad kind. The happy kind is the voluntary lien. In other words, the debtor or the owner agreed to the lien voluntarily. In other words, in order to buy the property, they didn't have $500,000. They had to borrow it. So in order to borrow it from the bank, in order to buy this property, they had to say to the mortgage company, the bank, look, let me borrow that money. I'll buy the property, and then I will pledge the property as security for this amount of money I'm borrowing. In other words, if I don't pay you back as I agree and promise to, you can take the property from me. I'm letting you put voluntarily letting you put a lien on the property, right? An involuntary lien is not so happy and positive. The owner is saying, look, I didn't pay my taxes. I didn't pay my mortgage. And so therefore the the government is putting a tax lien on the property, or the mortgage company is foreclosing on the property. It's an involuntary lien. They're not happy about that lien. There are certain categories of liens that get paid first. For instance, if the owner has a limited amount of money and has to pay back these liens, who gets paid first? Which liens are first in line? Any liens that are specific to the property are the very first ones that get paid. Other liens that are not specific to the property but are maybe like IRS debt, state of North Carolina income tax, what else? Anything that attaches to the real and the personal property is a general lien, real and or personal property. If it's specific to the property itself, it's called a specific lien, and the lien that gets paid first is called the superior lien. So a specific lien is superior to a general lien. Let's look at some examples of specific liens. The reason it's called specific is it is against a specific property. The number one position, the first lien that always gets paid back is property tax. And the second place lien that is always in the second position is special assessment liens to the government. So the government put themselves in the first and second position of who is entitled to get paid first. Real property tax first, special assessments by the government, if there are any, are second. After that, it's the rest of the types of liens called specific liens. It's any other specific liens specific to the property, which include the mortgage, because that mortgage is specific to that property. It's also liens that were put on the property from vendors that you may have hired and you didn't pay them. You hired a roofer, you hired a plumber, an electrician, and you didn't pay any of them, and they realized this, they're not getting paid, and they put a lien on your property. Those are called mechanics liens. They're put in place by contractors. And then there's another kind of a weird one, but it's called a commercial broker lien, and it sounds just like what it is. It's only for commercial real estate. It does not apply to residential real estate. So in commercial real estate, if you have a listing and that owner doesn't want to pay you your commission that you are entitled to, you could put a lien on the property so that when they do finally sell the property, with or without you, you've got a lien in place, which means you're going to get your commission at that point. Commercial broker lien. So the mechanics lien has some requirements. It requires that you have a contract with the owner of the property. You must have an actual contract with them. It also requires that the vendor, the mechanics person, the person that did the work, right? They have to file that lien within 120 days of providing labor or materials. They have to file it at the courthouse. They also have to decide to enforce the lien within 180 days of providing labor or materials. So they have 120 days to file it, and then within 180 days, they have to enforce it if they're going to. And then when does the mechanics lien kick in? How do we determine what place in the lineup that roofer or that plumber gets their money? We know they don't get it first because the property tax gets it first. If you owe property taxes, that's going to get paid first. If you owe money on government special assessment, that's going to get paid second. But what about the rest of them? Let's say you owe the plumber some money for work that she started on July 1st, and you also owe the electrician some money for work that he started on July 3rd. Which one is next in line after taxes and special assessments? The July 1st one. What did I say? The plumber? The plumber was July 1st, so therefore she's the third in line. She's ahead of the electrician because he didn't file his lien. Doesn't matter about filing. He didn't furnish material or labor until July 3rd. It's whoever furnished material or labor first is who is in line first. So here's our example. The first day of labor and materials in this case was provided on February 1st. The last day of labor and materials was June 1st, but that doesn't matter. The lien was filed within 120 days. That means it needed to have been filed by September 30th. The enforcement of the lien, it must be enforced in this case by November 30th at the latest. That's the 180 days from the first day of labor and materials. So it's in line for collection because of the February 1st date. This mechanics lien is in place because they started work or provided materials on February 1st. Here's the broker lien that we talked about. A real estate broker in commercial real estate must have a written agency agreement, like a written listing agency agreement, and they are representing the owner in a commercial transaction, and they're allowed to place a lien on the property, whether it's a property for sale or for lease, in order to protect their commission. Okay, specific liens are superior to general liens, but let's look at what general liens are. They're against all your property, not just your real estate, but your personal property too. Your general lien rides on your shoulders even if you sell a property. It's not attached to that property. You're not done with it when you sold that property. You still owe it. And you walk around this earth with a general lien attached to you, IRS lien, for instance, or North Carolina revenue lien. Other kinds of general liens include a judgment lien. You got in legal trouble, a court decided to put a lien against you because of the outcome of your court case, or a personal property tax lien, car tax lien. All of these are not specific to the property itself. They are about you. So you just kind of have them on you until you pay them off, regardless of that property that you own. So because a property, let's talk about specific liens again. Because a property might have liens on it, you might still be able to find a buyer willing to buy it from you. And they are allowed to. You are allowed to sell a property, even though it has liens on it. But you would have to disclose that it has the liens. You'd have to tell the buyer, look, I'll sell it to you, but it's got some liens that you should know about. And therefore, do you think that buyer is probably going to want to pay you less than market value? So if the property is worth $450,000, but you have $100,000 worth of liens against the property, you're not going to be able to find a buyer willing to pay you $450,000. They might be willing to pay you $250,000 or something so that they can buy it for a great deal, pay your liens, and still end up with built-in equity in the property, right? So, does an encumbrance or a lien prevent the transfer of property? Can you still sell it even though it has an encumbrance on it? It does not prevent the sale. No. And in fact, a grantee cannot refuse an easement as an encumbrance. A grantee could agree to assume responsibility for a lien, for instance. Let's look at the priority of these liens. North Carolina is what's called a pure race state, meaning race to the courthouse. First one who gets there and records their lien wins. They're ahead of others. So, racing to the courthouse determines who's paid first. Always in first position, though, again, real property tax first, special assessments by the government second behind that. After those two, then it's any specific liens are next in order of when they were recorded. And then after those, any general liens in order of them being recorded. It might be that all the money gets used up before you even get to the general liens, or maybe even before you even get to the specific liens. So let's look at this example of a priority of liens problem on the test. What would be the correct order of these liens? Well, we've got a state tax one, IRS one, a mortgage one, a mechanics one, and a property tax. Which one? What's the easy? We can find out the very first position that gets paid first, because you've memorized that property tax gets paid first. So that's the first one. Property tax is first. You probably knew that. Then we can divide the remaining four into two categories, specific and general. Which are the specific liens out of this group? The mortgage and the mechanics liens. So those come next, but in what order? The first one that got recorded gets put in next position. So that's the mortgage because it was recorded July of 03. The mechanics lien, August of 07. They're the next two positions. And then finally, the general liens are next in order of recordation. We have a state tax lien on June of 01, and then the IRS lien in October of 01. Tax is always first. Assessments are always second. There are none in this problem. Specific liens come next. General liens come last. And then the mechanics liens, which are types of specific liens, are given the dates that their labor or materials were first delivered. Other kinds of encumbrances include a writ of attachment, which basically is when a lien is created because a court order has been issued. A court order has been attached to the property, creating a lien as the result of some legal action that you lost, right? You lost that. Therefore, you've got a lien against your property attached to it due to a court order. A judge said so. Private deed restrictions mean not the government. So either the developer you bought from or the homeowners association, some private entity or person is placing requirements on this property. In other words, you can buy it, but you must build at least a 2,000-foot brick ranch on the property. You can't build anything different than that. Nothing smaller, nothing besides brick, nothing that's more than one level, for instance. A developer could put a deed restriction, a private deed restriction on the property, a homeowners association. The other residents could all get together and say, from here forward, we're going to adopt this rule that in this neighborhood, houses must be like this. The private deed restrictions compared to a public deed restriction, like a zoning law, which one rules? Which one is the one that applies? As you'll see in other parts of this course, the one that applies is the stricter one. So it doesn't matter that it's the government. If it's a zoning law or rule, but it's not as strict as the private deed restriction, then it's the private one still that must be adhered to. Doesn't matter that it's the government. They have a not as strict of a rule, so therefore you have to follow the stricter one. You're following the private deed restriction. A lis pendens means there is litigation that has not yet been resolved. It is pending litigation about the title to the property. You don't know what's going to happen yet because it hasn't happened yet. It's still in the works. It clouds the title, but you could still sell your property with a lis pendens attached. It's just the buyer needs to be told there is one so that they can make a decision if they really want to get into this, because it might be that when the litigation is finished, who knows, something could be done that would affect the property that they wouldn't like. So, but they could still buy it. A lis pendens is recorded notice of pending litigation involving title to the property. Here's the order of events. A lis pendens is filed because there's litigation currently in the works. Then the court hearing happens. The judge affirms any sort of valid claims, and if there are any invalid claims that she deems not worthy, she quiets them. In other words, don't bring this here. I don't care about that. It's invalid. And then she makes a ruling. She clears the cloud, which perfects the title. Now it's got a nice, clean, clear title, free to be used to sell without worrying about any sort of smudges on it anymore. When you have a proceeds of a transfer, who always gets paid in a sale when there's a lien? Which liens get paid first is what I'm trying to say here. Who always gets paid first? The tax liens or the special assessment by the government liens. Therefore, the government is who always gets paid first if there are any outstanding liens. And then everyone else gets paid in order of when they recorded their liens. An easement is another kind of encumbrance. It's the right someone has to use someone else's property. It is not ownership. It's not even rentalship. It's not freehold or leasehold. It's just the right somebody has or an entity might have to use the land. It might be that they can go across your land to get to their utility box because it's a power company, a utility company easement. or gas company or you name it, right? An easement appurtenant is something that grants or benefits the land. It's granted to parcels of land. It's a benefit to the land. Examples are access to utility boxes, driveways. You might also see it referred to as an appurtenant easement. You might see it in either order. Easement appurtenant or appurtenant easement. It's a benefit to the easement holder. An easement appurtenant looks like this. We have a property up against the road, and the property behind it cannot access the main road here on the bottom that's horizontal with the dotted line. And there in North Carolina, you're not allowed to have landlocked property. So it has to have this easement appurtenant for its driveway to get to the main road. Well, the lot that is the one the driveway is over, that's the lot that they have to allow that easement. They have to allow that driveway. They are the servient estate. The one who's receiving the benefit of that driveway going across their neighbor's lot, that's called the dominant estate. It might be the opposite of what you would guess. The dominant estate receives the benefit of the easement. The servient estate is the one who has to have it over their property. An easement in gross is a benefit to the easement holder, not to the land. It's granted to an individual or an entity, benefits the individual. Like a utility easement or railroad easement, it doesn't run with the land. It is an easement that belongs to the holder of the easement. Here's what both would look like on the same couple of properties. You'd have that driveway easement appurtenant. You'd also have the easement in gross for the utility company or the railroad tracks, or that may be a drainage field. How are easements created? Expressly. Express means intentionally. You intended to do this thing. Express doesn't mean in writing instead of verbal, though. It could be verbal. Express just means you talked about it on purpose. And then implied means that you didn't talk about it, but based on your actions, they're assuming certain things. And I had a high school football coach that told me something about what happens when you assume, and I think you all know what I'm talking about. Assuming is rarely a good idea. In your daily life, give me an example. Think of an example of what an implied contract might be. We're going to talk about contracts in chapter 9, and we're going to see this express versus implied idea. So in your daily life within the last week, I'll bet you have engaged in an implied contract. I bet you have. Because if you sat down in a restaurant and ordered food, they brought it to you and you ate it and you didn't even pay for it yet. The payment comes at the end. It's implied that you're going to pay for it because you sat down and you ordered it. You didn't have to give them a proof of funds letter or a pre-approval letter before you ordered that food. You could have even ordered $100 worth of food and drinks. You might be thinking, how close am I to that door? Could I sprint out the door and not have to pay? That's a different story. But an implied contract in your daily life is you ordering food and eating it before you pay for it, because your actions imply that you're going to do so. In this case, an express easement means that you are saying, here's my intention. Here's what I want to do with it. Usually it's in writing, and it should be in writing, because in order to, if you had to take it to court, take somebody to court, the judge is going to say, you're saying that they didn't do what? Okay, show me that in writing. Did they agree to it in writing? Is there a contract? There's not. Then get out of my courtroom. I can't help you. So it's better to have the express agreement in writing. But because if it's not in writing, it doesn't mean it's not an express agreement. It could have been an express verbal agreement. It's just, in that case, not one that you have any ability to enforce. Express means intentional. Implied means it exists because of the circumstance of necessity. Necessity, you have to give access to the power company. An implied easement. Operation of law is another way an easement can be created, through eminent domain, whereby the government, the city perhaps, condemns your front yard, half of it, They were going to take it over, you and your neighbors, so that they can widen the road. They're going to turn it from 2 lanes to 4 lanes. Therefore, they're going to take over part of your property through eminent domain. They're going to condemn part of your property. A prescription easement is weird. It's kind of a unique thing. It's sort of, think about squatters when you see that word, adverse use or prescription. We're going to talk about that in just a second. An easement by necessity looks like this. The property owner can't be landlocked. That orange line at the bottom is the main road. The red line is the driveway. There's a right-of-way running over one parcel to grant access to a public right-of-way. And that's an easement by necessity. It's a necessity that the property owned by A's house, has access to the main road. Okay, here's the weird one. Prescriptive easement. Adverse possession. It says that if someone acquires property through adverse use, they could at some point in the future go to the court and say to the judge, hey, look, I've been using it this certain way. I want it to be mine now. I want you to take it from that person and give it to me for free. How does that work? For instance, let's say that you live here in Charlotte and you are given some land in the mountains, Asheville, and you don't even like the mountains. You go to the beach, not the mountains. You don't even want to go check on the land, and so you never do. You pay the taxes, but you never go check on the land. Meanwhile, one of the neighbors decides to use that lot. It's an acre lot that you never go to, and your neighbor tends to start using it, and she plants crops on it. She plants corn on it and vegetables, lovely raised garden beds on your property, and you don't even know. And she does this every year for 20 years. And she does this openly. She doesn't even try to hide it. In fact, when people drive by, they just think, oh, there she is in her yard. They think it's hers. She does it openly. She does it continuously every year for 20 years. She does it exclusively. It's just her. It's not like the whole street using it. She does it actually, and she does it notoriously. In other words, if you found out about it, you would not allow her to do it. You don't even know. It's notorious. If this use case has all of these elements in place, all these 5 elements in the acronym OCEAN, then after the 20 years that are required for this to happen, 20 years continuously, she could go to the court and say, look, I've been using this thing for 20 years. Give it to me. I want it. And she could possibly get it. She could quite possibly get it. That's a prescriptive easement acquired through adverse use. What causes an easement to be terminated? Well, if you don't need it anymore, it can be terminated. The purpose of the easement no longer exists. Or if the easement holder becomes the owner. What about back here? What if this guy A buys the lot in front of him from that person, and now he owns all of those lots? Well, guess what? There's no more need for the easement because he owns the whole thing. That's what that means. Dominant estate releases to the servient estate. It could be that, let's say that over here, let's look at it this way. Okay, we've got this person back here. We'll call them the owner. That is B. We've got the owner up here of A. Here's our street. Let's say that B has been using a driveway across the property of A, but turns out there's a street back here too. It's just that there used to be a whole bunch of trees back here that B liked. They didn't want to bother the trees, but for some reason they decided, you know what? I think I'd rather have a driveway out on this street now. And so they put a driveway out to this street and they decided to start using that one. Therefore, they don't need this one anymore. They could release that property owner A from that previously used easement. So that could be one. Dominant estate releases to the servient estate. or if the easement is abandoned by the easement holder. That'd be another way that the easement could be terminated. Okay, an encroachment. Another kind of encumbrance is an encroachment. Has the word roach. Bad, bad. We don't like it. We don't like roaches. We don't like encroachers or encroachments. It's an improvement like a building or a driveway or a fence that violates a property line. The best way, really the only way to discover an encroachment is to have a survey done. I sold a house in Mooresville a couple of years ago, and to look at that house, you would see the main street here. You'd see some front yard. You'd see the house, and there's the driveway. And they put a fence that looks just like this rectangle, and it looked perfectly lined up, perfectly straight. Lovely. The only problem is the property line was actually this. They were 5 feet back here, 5 feet over the line onto their neighbor's lot. They were encroaching. The seller of the property my buyers wanted to buy encroached on the neighbor's property. So my buyers had to be told, and we found out because my buyers had a survey. Turns out the sellers had a survey done before they had put up their fence. They put up the fence themselves, but they did have a survey, and that surveyor was wrong. That's how they ended up having it encroaching. We had to work some stuff out and get some permission and this and that and the other. It can be fixed. It can be approved without having to move the fence sometimes. And as long as everybody's aware and are happy with the result, that's okay. But you better believe you got to have a survey, and you as a broker want to be sure you are on record as having told them you need a survey. Don't ever be in a position to not have proof that you told them to get one. When there is an encroachment, when there is an encroachment on a property, it clouds the title of both the property encroaching and the property being encroached upon. There's a cloud on both. We just talked about how to terminate an easement. Let's talk about encroachments. Encroachments, I see the word roach, I think always bad. Something is violating a property line. Something is over the line. It could be a building, it could be an improvement, a fence, a driveway. The only way to discover an encroachment officially is a survey. Sometimes neighbors get sneaky. Sometimes neighbors in the middle of the night go move the flag. Because that surveyor, what do? Any ideas? Anybody seen a survey done? They often have the yellow tripod, the little scope. Some other guys in the distance holding a flag or yellow stick. They're sighting those lines. How do they know where to start? Well, in modern times, there are buried metal rods. And they will find those rods in one way or another. And that's the corner. And then from that corner, they have descriptions. They have things to follow in the records that say, look northwest 3 degrees, go for 100 feet to this other point. That's what they're doing. They're scoping those lines, and they'll put little orange flags that you can see. That doesn't mean anything. Just because the flag is there doesn't mean that's really where a thing is, right? Because maybe the neighbor moved it. They get a little sneaky sometimes. Only way to discover an encroachment is through a survey. That's why we should have brokers go on record and say we need to have a survey done. And it clouds the titles of both of those properties. Is my audio so weird that it is distracting faces? about now? Is that better? Brother. Are you hearing an echo? Okay, this is all we're going to do the rest of the day. No more experimenting. Sorry to put you through that. We're still good? Okay, moving on. Where is it? Okay, so that survey, that encroachment across the line puts a cloud on the titles of both the properties of the one that is doing the encroaching and the one who is being encroached upon. Dominant servient. Review question, quiz question. Can the servient grantee refuse the easement? Can that servient property owner refuse the easement? No, they cannot. They cannot refuse the easement. It's got to be there. They bought it with that understanding. That's the end of chapter 2, guys. We're going to move on into 3. Find number 3.
Neal.
Yes.
At the end of the chapters, those tests, are those little quizzes kind of like questions that will be on the test, or?
Not necessarily. They weren't written by the same entity. They were written, by the publisher of the book. They're still good for review purposes, but it's not exactly how you're going to see it on the exam. I would say still do it though, because it will help you review the material that you just learned.
And the ones that the test will be like are what you guys are going to give us in the middle?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, the midterm and the practice exams are going to be more like what the PSI will look like.
Okay.
And then if that is something that you're really into and you're willing to spend the extra money, it doesn't come to us, but it's another website. Let me think. Let me double check it so I don't tell you wrong. There's a service where you can buy access for like either 3 months or 2, maybe. I think there might be a 90-day plan and maybe a 60-day plan. And double check. And they have like 1,200 question test banks across both the national and the state. And here it is. It's this place, learntestpass.com. Learntestpass.com. You can buy access and just take tests. Just take them, right? It's like, I don't know, maybe $70, something like that. Here they are. The full bundle for both the national and the state questions, access to 1,200 questions, or you can just do the national only or the state only. National is 800 questions, the state is 400, but it looks like this. There it is. For 90 days, it's $50. For 120 days, it's $70. And you have access. You just go there, you say, how many questions do you want to be quizzed on now? You don't get to go through one by one and pick the questions. They'll say, we will put together a test for you now. How many do you want to sit for? Or maybe it might be duration. How long do you have? You have 30 minutes. We'll put together a quiz for you from the bank. And so if you do like 5 of them in a row, you're going to see some overlap. You're going to, I saw this question on the one I did last time. So there will maybe just through the luck of the draw kind of thing, but still 1,200 questions in like 90 days. It's a pretty good deal, especially because it's going to be a little more like what the PSI questions are. In fact, you're welcome. I think, I'm not sure who we're going to use. We've used this company before for our class final exam. Because obviously we can't give you a test like we used to. We can't just send you a PDF for the final exam that counts for your grade or for your pass or fail, because we have no control over that. No auditing control, no security for keeping people from cheating kind of control. Therefore, it has to be a testing service and what they'll do is they'll say, hold up your computer camera, scan the whole room. You can't have anything around you. Make sure that you don't have anybody else in the room. You've got to be in a quiet environment for the next 2 hours or however long they say.
and you've got to prove it. And then if they record you the whole time, by the way, they record your face and your screen both the entire time. There we go. There's me. So after the test, they can go back in and some employee of theirs is watching every one of them to see, did they look like they were cheating? And sometimes they'll come out and ask you, they'll say, look like there's some papers being rustled around and look like your eyes were shifting, and explain yourself. It's to that level. The commission requires it to be to that level because cheating and test questions, sanctity is like of utmost importance. So just be aware. That's how that final is going to work. I don't know if we're going to use them this time, but we have used this same company, Learn, Test, Pass, for our class final exam. All the more reason that you might want to consider using them for their little test bank thing. You'd think I was getting paid to promote them, but I'm not. But I think it's a good resource for you. That's why I'm suggesting it. We'll either use them, or I think it's either between them or another one, and I'll find out. I don't even know if John and Doug have decided what the final exam is going to actually, who's going to provide that, but I'll let you know when I find out. Here we go. Chapter 3, taxation. It's a short one. By the way, I haven't forgotten you. Oh, show you one more thing. There it is. Still working on this. I got to finish up the last couple of questions. I'm adding how many questions come from the national versus coming from the state. So I'm going to add those to this middle column, and then you'll have kind of a little guide. Again, this is not hard and fast. I reserve the right to go slower or faster as needed, but it will give you an idea of what comes next and just kind of be, it'll help you stay on track. And we are now officially on day 4. Looks like we're behind, but we're not, because on day 1, we added in license, law, and rule. So today we're going to get through 3, 4, and most of 5. And so we're in good shape. That said, you can see everything okay. Taxation, and there's your faces. Awesome. Back to normal. Level 2 stuff. We got some level 2 stuff. We've got some level 3 in the form of calculations. Math, good old math. 4 test questions coming from chapter 3. 4 questions on the PSI exam are coming out of this material. If only we knew which 4. Taxation is a government power, as you well know. That's how those streets are so nice. That's how those roundabouts got added. Do you like the roundabouts, by the way? Do you have roundabouts in your town? Or are you like, can we just turn left or right, please? Do you like you got to go this way and do a U-turn to get back that way? Yeah, we get creative and justify all kinds of millions of dollars. It's a good thing I'm not in charge of the government budget, because I have no concept of what things should be worth. And I'd be like, I'm just going to turn right. I don't need to go around this way to turn right. Okay, some words. Ad valorem, we have already gotten a glimpse of. At value, the market value. Theoretically, ad valorem means what the property is worth. You're going to be taxed on based upon what it's worth. Now, if anybody's ever owned a property and you've looked at your tax record and seen what your tax value is, you were probably happy with what the city and state thought your house was worth, because you knew that was really worth more than what they thought it was worth. Because all you care about is that they charge you taxes based on the lowest number possible, right? They don't check all the time every year and update it. They do eventually. Every 8 years, they do this thing called an octennial reappraisal to just see, okay, how bad did we get off? How far off did we get? Everybody is reappraised every 8 years. That's a requirement. Octennial reappraisal. It's on the next slide. We'll see in a minute. But they're reappraising it. That doesn't mean they're sending an appraiser, though. it pretty much just means, okay, 8 years ago, we didn't have the Food Lion or the Harris Teeter or that extra school. Now we do. Now those things cost some money, and therefore we need to raise everybody's value by a certain amount. Anybody have this reappraisal notice come to you in the mail? Charlotte, it happened like 3 years ago. I think Cabarrus, it happened like 4 years ago, maybe. And everybody was in an uproar because what had been happening for the 2 or 3 years before that, ridiculous over market, over asking price offers that got accepted. So we had now a lot of property sales on record showing a lot of appreciation. And the government's like, hey, wait, what about us? We want some taxes that reflect this new value you just saying your house is worth. And so people's tax values were going up 20% or more. And they weren't happy. Now that means their tax bill is going up because the bill is calculated ad valorem, at value, market value. And now the government is saying, oh, it's worth more than it was 8 years ago. The assessed value is the tax value. Okay, already we're at a point of confusion. I can sense it. When it comes to this test, you're going to see things like this. The question might look like this. The tax value, well, let's say the seller, the buyer bought it for a sales price of $300,000. The tax value on the property, also known as the assessed value, is $275,000. Sometimes they might not give you dollars. They might say the tax value is 75% of the market value. Now, let me just be consistent here and calculate the right number, because I know 275 is not 75% of 300. That'd be 225. Okay, so don't worry, you're not having to do math yet. I'm just trying to make this more accurate. This is all about the terminology. So sales price, another word for that is market value. When you see that on test questions, you might see those things used interchangeably. Tax value, another term for that is assessed value. Okay. Assessed value, tax value, sales price, market value. And so when we see that the tax value is 75% of the market value, that means go find out what they bought it for and then figure what 75% of what they bought it for is. That's how you figure out the tax value according to the test question. In real life, don't worry about it. You'll learn that when you need to. Here we go. So if the test question said, again, if it said the tax value is 75% of the market value, what you're going to do is say, okay, well then what's market value? Oh, it's the sale price. It's what they paid for it. So 300,000 is what they paid for it. What is 75% of that? Just multiply it by 75 and then hit the percent key. Hitting the percent key changes the number 75. It moves the decimal over properly. And that gives you the 225, which is 75% of 300,000. So when you put in the calculator 75%, remember that 75, the number 75 is another way of writing the number 75.0. There's an understood 0.0 at the end of any whole number like this. When you see the number 3, another way of writing that is 3.0. Or the number 358. Another way of writing that is 358.0. So you have an understood decimal. And so when you see 75%, the decimal is right here. And when you hit the percent key in your calculator, What's happening in the calculator is this decimal is moving over 2 spaces to the left. So what's the decimal version of 75%? 0.75 is the same thing as writing or plugging in 75%, because we can check it with our calculator. 75 and the percent sign, boom, 0.75. You need the decimal version in order to do the math calculation. If your calculator doesn't have this percent sign, then you're going to need to know how to turn it into a decimal. That's why moving it over right here matters. So if your calculator probably is always going to have the percent sign, but if it were 80% of the market value and you don't have a percent sign, then you're going to say, oh, the decimal version of 80% is 0.80. You don't even need the 0 in the end. Just 0.8 is the same thing as 80%. And so in the back of your textbook, there's that appendix, that math appendix that covers converting like this from fractions to decimals. So maybe if this seems a little weird, give that a refresh, or look up your favorite YouTube channel or Google it and try to just get comfortable with this whole decimal moving thing, this whole conversion from percent to decimal. So that's kind of what the terminology looks like. Ad valorem is market value, at value, the sale price, what you paid for it, what it's worth on the open market. Assessed value is the same thing as saying tax value. It's the value the government is taxing you based upon. And it's usually lower than what the actual market value is in real life. And then this thing called the Machinery Act. It's basically the legislation. It's the name of the legislation. Remember? What is it? What's the recent thing that got passed? The Inflation Reduction Act. It's like that, right? That's the name of that piece of legislation. So the Machinery Act is the legislation that was put in place years ago that covers how property taxes are going to be handled. When you need to know the ins and outs of how we handle property tax in North Carolina, look up, Google search North Carolina Machinery Act, and you'll find the general statute talking about taxes. There it is. Google says the Machinery Act is General Statute 105, Subchapter 2. You don't need to know that. I'm just showing you that that's a thing. It's the framework for listing, assessing, and appraising real and personal property in North Carolina. Under this GS, General Statute 105-286, all counties must conduct a reappraisal at least every 8 years, octennial reappraisal. And so if you click on that link, it tells you more about it. But let's look at what we come to next. So the Machinery Act is a testable term. It regulates the property taxes. It's the system, it's the process that we follow. What's the timetable? Every 8 years, octennial reappraisal must be done. Reappraise every property to make sure that the government is getting as much as they possibly can from your taxes, because $1.37 per $100 of your tax value is kind of one way that it's calculated. So $1.37 per $100 of your tax value is a lot different when your tax value is $350,000 compared to back when it was only $300,000. Right? They want to get their tax money from you for every dollar your house could possibly be claimed to be worth. Now, because development can occur pretty quickly, there is another optional horizontal adjustment that can be done. If the local area says, you know what, we've seen a lot of improvement, a lot of development in the last 4 years, therefore we're going to do a uniform adjustment. They can do a uniform adjustment every 4th year. It's called a horizontal adjustment, just to bump up those values some more, make sure they're getting all the taxes they can, because with more development comes the need for more taxes to fund the additional burden on the roads, the additional schools, all the fun stuff. The tax rate, the rate at which you are taxed on your real estate, can change from one year to the next. It doesn't necessarily change, but it could. It's adjusted every year. So you're not just concerned with what your tax value is, you're also curious as to what's the tax rate this year. And so we'll see that timetable in one more slide. Keep in mind this one too. Let's say that the dark blue square is the county you live in. I live in Cabarrus County, and I live in the city of Concord within Cabarrus County. So the light blue oval is Concord. The dark blue oval is the whole county. If I just live in the dark blue square in just the county, but not in the city limits, do I need to pay the city taxes, or can I just pay the county taxes? They're going to charge me for either county taxes or city or both. But I don't have to pay them both if I don't live in both places. The only time I live in both the city and the county is when I live in the city limits. Does that make sense? Obviously, if I'm in the light blue oval, I'm in the city limits, and the city is in the county. Therefore, I'm in both. Therefore, I have to pay both the city taxes and the county taxes. But if I want to be out in the country, maybe outside of the city limits, and I used to be, but then they came in and got me, and they what's the word? I just blanked on it. The city came in and redrew the line, so now I'm in the city limits. But if you're only out in the county, there it is. Thank you, Shane. They annexed me. Then all you have to pay is the taxes on the county taxes, not the city tax rate. So just keep that in mind. Look for that on the test when they ask you to calculate it. Think, okay, did they tell me in the test question, is the property in the city limits or outside the city limits? Because you're going to need to know whether to include the city tax rate or only use the county tax rate. If you're in the city limits, you're going to add them both together. If you're only in the county, then you're only going to use the county rate. In no event ever will you only use the city tax rate. Does that make sense? Because you can't be in the city without also being in the county, like physically, geographically, in physics, in the laws of time and space, right? If you're in a city right now, you're also located in the county in which that city exists because you're in the city. Here's what the timetable looks like. That tax rate that can change from year to year, that's done in July. What's the rate for your area? You'll find out in July. Tax rate is set in July. Testable question. The tax bill does not come out until August. That's when they mail them out. But it can't be paid until September, right? You're not allowed to pay it early. Some of you, that's a problem. Some of you are annoyed by that because you want to pay the bills as soon as you possibly can. My wife is that way. I want to pay the bill as late as I possibly can because I'd rather do stuff with that money or maybe let it grow until the last possible minute that I need to hand it off to the next person who I need to pay, or some happy medium in there somewhere, right? Your taxes are due for the purposes of this test and in real life on September 1st. That's when you can start paying your property tax. But you got the notice in the mail of what your tax bill is going to be. You got that in August. When we calculate for a closing, one of the items on the closing statement, the seller and the buyer, that seller doesn't want to pay for the whole year's taxes, do they? They're not willing to pay for the whole year. They're going to pay for the year up to the closing date, but no further, because past the closing date, the day after closing, all the way through the end of the year, they're not the owner anymore. And they're not nice. They were nice, but they're not so nice that they're going to want to give that buyer a free few months of taxes covered, are they? That's one of the math we're going to have to do, is calculating whose responsibility is the taxes for the year. How much of the year is the seller's responsibility in dollars and how much is the buyer's responsibility? And that's why September 1st matters. We handle the money differently in 3 possible different ways, depending on when in the year the property was closed. We'll get more into that later chapter. Other dates, the tax liens The taxes are due no later than December 31st. You can start paying on September 1st, and then you can choose to not pay all the way up till December 31st without penalty. You're not charged a penalty. In fact, how many of you make a house payment and part of your payment is for taxes because you're going to let your lender pay them for you? They're not paying them for you. They're paying them so that you don't have to. And they're not doing it to be nice. They're doing it to make sure they get paid. Because remember, the tax lien position, number one position is the number one lien position is the taxes, even above the mortgage. Your lender's like, we don't want you to not pay your taxes because they could foreclose on the property that we have a loan on to you for. I threw a lot of words in there. I don't know if they were in the right order, but they care. Your lender cares if you pay your taxes. Therefore, they're saying, just send us the money and we'll make sure it gets paid on time. That's why they're doing it. It is for convenience to you, but it's really for them to know it got paid. Because if times get rough, they want to be sure you went ahead and paid your taxes because they cut the check and sent it in for you. But the day after December 1st, you're late. January 1st, there is a tax lien that is filed on the unpaid taxes because you didn't pay them. January 1st, they put a lien on the property for the taxes you didn't pay, the property taxes. January 5th is the deadline you have to pay any past due taxes. You're also going to have to pay a penalty at that point, but it's also the deadline to pay any past due taxes. And then as of July 1st, they're going to tell the whole world that you did it. That's the public shaming portion. Like when the real estate commission disciplines us, they publicly shame us with the putting it in the bulletin, right? Well, they publicly list your property in the paper, whatever that is. What's this newspaper thing you speak up? They put it online and say, hey, so-and-so, this property didn't pay their taxes. And that's probably gonna come out like February or March, but January 31st, that taxable property is listed. That's what you need to know for the test. Off of this page, the important things that I see on the test that pop up, I never see the actual test, but the practice tests and what I've heard shows up on the test. The July is when the tax rate is set. September 1st, you need that for doing your calculations to figure out seller's version of responsibility versus the buyer's tax responsibility. And January 1st is when the lien is filed. 5th is the deadline. Okay, more timetable stuff. We'll get more into this in chapter 12. The new rate is set in July. The bills are mailed in August. The taxes are due and payable. You can start paying them. You can pay them as of September 1st. And then January 1st, the tax lien is filed. This is for you visual learners. January 5th is the deadline to pay the past due taxes. And January 31st is when the properties are listed. You could lose the house because of not paying the taxes. Probably wouldn't happen the first year, but if you fall far enough behind in paying your property taxes, they could do what's called a tax lien foreclosure, and somebody could end up paying the taxes and then owning the property. There's a lot of other moving parts in the mix there, but that's basically the deal. You got to pay your taxes. And then the rates of the courthouse, who's paid first? There it is. Remember that the property taxes are first, as well as special assessments, and then specific liens, and then general liens. Some level 3 calculations. Let's take a look at some math. Make a little space on my whiteboard here. All right. It pretty much comes down to this. This is the bulk of what the math looks like, guys. And for you visual folks, the thing on the right might be more useful to you. For you folks that were okay with math and you remember it fondly from algebra class, what you see on the left is what you're familiar with. 2 times 3 equals 6. 6 divided by 3 equals 2. 6 divided by 2 equals 3. If we use the visual method on the right, we call it the circle formula or the T formula, the T method. The 6 goes on top, and then the 2 and the 3 that you're multiplying go on the bottom. Think of that vertical line as a times sign, and think of the horizontal line as a division sign. So here's our 6 on top. Think of this one as a divided by. Think of this one as a multiply. There's our 2 and there are 3. In a typical test question for this exam, they're going to give you 2 out of the 3 things on the problem. And when you know those 2 things and you know this formula, which could also have a circle around it if you want, you're going to know, oh, I need to put the 6 up here because I know this from memory, and I need to put the 3 down here. And that means what I don't know is over here. And so therefore, if the 6 is on top and the 3 is on the bottom, I need to do 6 divided by 3. What is that? Plug it in the calculator. 6 divided by 3. Boom. 2. And plug it in to that other spot. This will make more sense when we look at an actual problem. So when it comes to calculating taxes, the different counties in North Carolina do it differently. Around Charlotte, from what I've seen, it's always the one on the right. It's the dollars per 100 method. So let's don't even look at the one on the left for right now. I want to show you the dollars per 100 method. When you're looking at the tax problem, when you get a tax math problem, they're going to say something like this. Let's see, let's make this a little better. Okay. It's going to be like the tax rate for the city is 87 cents per $100. $100 of what? $100 of assessed value, or also known as of tax value. Same thing. So the tax rate is in the city limits is 87 cents per $100 of tax value. The tax rate for the county is 31 cents per $100 of tax value. The next piece of information you need to know is, where is the property located? And they'll say the property, let's just say, is in the city limits. If the property's in the city limits, how much of a rate are we going to need to work with? What rate are we going to need to use if the property is inside the city limits? Is 87 cents going to be good enough? Is 31 cents going to be good enough? How about 87 plus 31? That's $1.18. Since it's inside the city limits, we need to add them together. So the rate we're going to use is going to be the 87 cents per 100 plus the 31 cents per 100 for $1.18 per 100 dollars of tax value. $1.18 for every $100 that your tax value is, you're paying the government $1.18. Right? Sounds pretty small, right? When you think of it that way. So for every $100, I have to give the government $1.18. So now we know what our tax rate is. It's the $1.18 because the property's in the city limits. The next question is going to be this. Let's say that the tax value, what is that value on which I will be taxed? Tax value, they'll give it to you, $185,500. That's what the value of your property is according to the government. And it's that value that they want to apply the rate to. It's that value to which they want to apply the rate. So we've got two things, right? And if you remember, when we looked at the math, it looks like this. There's 3 total things. We've got 2 of them. So we just need to plug in the things that we have, but we need to know where to plug them in. So here's the formula for tax value. We want to find out what is the annual taxes due. I call it ANN tax because of the abbreviation. So good old ANN tax rides on top. That's on top. And the number on the bottom is the rate. By the way, there are other math problems that you'll do where there is a rate, like an interest rate. The rate is always one of the things on the bottom. Write it down, star it. The rate is always one of the things on the bottom if you're using this circle formula. So the rate's on the bottom, and then the tax value is the other thing on the bottom. So now you know where on the formula all the different 3 components are supposed to go. And you know 2 out of the 3 components, numbers. So let's start plugging them in. Do we know the annual taxes due? No, that's what we're trying to figure out. Do we know the rate? Yes, we just figured out what rate we're supposed to use, $1.18. So we're going to put that $1.18 right here. Oh, is that? Sorry, let me move that up. $1.18 for the rate. And then we also know the tax value because we gave it to you. Tax value is $185.5. Well, we have a circle. We have 2 of the 3 things. What do we do if we have the 2 things on the bottom? We multiply them together because they're both on the bottom. We're going to multiply 185.5 as the tax value. We're going to multiply it by the $1.18 per 100. And then we're going to see that there's a little problem. There's one more step. Wait a minute. Are you telling me that if I own a property with a tax value of $185,500 that I'm going to have to pay annual taxes of $218,000? No, because we forgot to divide by 100. That's what that rate thing comes in at, because when you put the rate in, you need to divide it by 100. What you could also do instead of plugging in divided by 100 is just hit the percent sign. Hang in there. I know it's a little weird, a little shaky, but I promise you after doing like 5 of them, you'll just be like, oh, and we do this next. Oh, divide by 100. It's no big deal. Hang in there with me. If you get to this point in the math problem on the test and you're like, oh my gosh, that's a ridiculous annual tax bill. That's nowhere near the, oh wait, I probably forgot to divide by 100. All you have to do is not redo anything. Just hit the divide by 100. And now you've got the right answer. Oh, thank goodness. I didn't have to go back and do all the math over again. So it kind of doesn't matter at what point you divide by 100. You could do it at the final step if you had to. And so the annual taxes due, this thing up here that you have to pay in this case are $2,000, $188.90. $2,188.90 is your annual tax bill. Okay? For the very first one, it gets better. I promise. You do like 5 of these, you'll have it. You'll be okay. So, little side note here about this rate thing. Sorry, I'm trying to see if I can get rid of this red line. The reason you need to take this $1.18 and divide it by 100 is because of the way it's given to you. $1.18, it's not $1.18, it's $1.18 per 100. Now, when you see this sign, what's the name of this sign in the chat? What do you call that when you see that out in the world? Percent. Oh, wait, per and cent. The word per means for every so-and-so. The word cent, how many pennies are in a dollar? 100 cents are in a dollar. See how you can remember that? Per 100. Percent means per hundred. Oh, what else is per hundred? The rate. The rate, the tax rate is per hundred, and so is the percent sign. So watch this. There's that $1.18. Hit the percent sign. That's the decimal version. You take this decimal version, you multiply it by the tax value. There's your right answer. With me? Those of you who are slightly rusty on math, hopefully you just had a little light bulb moment. Wait, oh, that's how that works. And see, the $1.18, we have the decimal identified. If the decimal weren't there, if it was just the number 118, you would know the decimal is here because it's always understood to be the end of the last number. But they told us where the decimal is, it's here. When we hit the percent sign, we're moving this decimal over those two spaces. And that's what happened here. 118% sign. It went away from here and it moved over two spaces to the left, 0.0118. All right. I don't expect you to get that from all the first go through. I'm just kind of explaining where it comes from. We're going to come back around and talk about the mill rate in a minute. But let's look at this one. So $1.50 per hundred is our rate. We, in order to, what they're doing here with this circle math is just, all right, 1 second, is just converting it to a decimal. They're just taking the $1.50 per hundred, you divide it by 100. So see, they're using the circle formula layout to show you what to do to get $1.50 and turn it into that decimal. You could also always just take this $1.50 and hit the percent sign, and same thing happens. Hitting the percent sign is the same thing as dividing by 100. So that's all they did here. They're showing that $1.50 per hundred divided by 100 on the lower right equals 0.015. And now it's that 0.015 is the decimal version of the rate that you need to work with. The city tax rate is, let's say, 65 cents per $100. The county tax rate is, let's say, 23 cents per $100. The property is outside the city limits. And also, let's do something a little different this time. The market value of the property, meaning what they paid for it, meaning the sales price, is $250,000. And the tax value is 85% of the market value. The government is deciding to tax them based on a tax value of 85% of the last sales price or the market value. But let me make some room here. I'll rewrite this so I don't take up all my space. First of all, I just forgot what I said my market value was. What did I say that market value was? Oh, Janina figured out the tax value. Good. Tax value is 85%, I believe, of the market value. What was the, thank you, Danita, 250. 250 is the market value. Tax value is 85% of that, which means the tax value is, what did you say, 212.5? How'd she get that? She just took 85% of 250 in your calculator. 250 times 85% sign is 212,500. For the purposes of collecting taxes, the government says your house is worth 212.5. And you're okay with that. because you had to pay 250, but at least you're only paying taxes on 212.5, right? Usually it's that way. Usually the government has a lower tax value than the actual market value is, and most people are fine by it's fine by them. Okay, now that we have a tax value to work with, we need to recall our circle formula. Annual taxes on the top. What goes on the bottom? What always goes on the bottom? Yeah, tax value and the rate. The rate always goes on the bottom. Tax value goes on the bottom. So the rate and the tax value. What's the rate? Oh, okay. Well, we know the city rate is 65 cents per hundred. We know the county rate is 23 cents per hundred. Do we add them together? Why not? Yeah, you got it. It's 23 cents. We only need this one. We only need the county one. Because if here's the county and here's the city, this property is located out here somewhere, not in the city. Therefore, we don't need to pay city taxes. We don't need to pay for the city sidewalks. We don't enjoy them. We don't benefit from them. So the only thing we're going to work with on the rate is the 23 cents per $100. Don't forget the per hundred. What you could also do is do some good old manual labor. Let's bump this over two spaces. So the decimal version of 23 cents per hundred is 0.0023, just by moving the dot. And we can check that with our calculator and say 23 cents percent sign. That's the number you're going to multiply by your tax value. Speaking of the tax value, that's the 212.5. So we're going to take this number that we still have in our calculator actually and multiply it by our 212.5. So our annual taxes are noticeably less. That's the benefit of being in the county only, right? Plus it happens to be a pretty low tax rate for a county. $488.75 per year is your tax bill. Is that a little better this time? You remember to divide by 100. You divided by 100 or per 100 by turning it into that decimal that we needed it to be. What else could you have done? You could have done 212.5 times 0.23, and that would have given you this, and you'd have been like, that's a ridiculous number for an annual tax bill. Oh, I must have forgot to divide by 0 or by 100, so divide it by 100. Oh, there it is, 488.75. Or you could have said, that's a ridiculous number. Let's hit the percent sign, right? Dividing by 100 is the same as pushing the percent key. Okay. Now, as if that were all you had to deal with, that'd be great, wouldn't it? But there's another possible way. Some areas of North Carolina and across the country, but even in North Carolina, I think like toward the east, some of the eastern counties use this other thing. They don't use a divided by 100 method. They use what's called a mill rate. We just learned the dollars per 100 method. But there is also this other animal. It's going to be either one or the other, two different methods of a rate. And so over here, let's say we used $1.50 per 100. And to convert that to a decimal is move the decimal over 2 spaces to the left. So that's the decimal version of this is 0.015. And we could check that by plugging in the calculator. There it is. Okay. Some parts of the state say, forget this dollar per 100 nonsense. We do mill rates. We are going to tell you that if you own a property that has a certain tax value, the tax rate you're going to multiply it by is going to be 15 mils. The tax rate in our town is 15 mils. What do we do with that? Okay, we still have our $185,000 tax value. We'll go with that. We got a mill rate. We need to figure out the annual taxes. We have our rate. It's 15 mils. And we also have our tax value of 185.5. When you work with mills, when you see the word mill, I'm going to give you like maybe a memory aid. When I see the word mill, I think millions, right? I think $1 million. And when I think $1 million, I think this number, because that's $1 million. I'm seeing a lot of sets of 3 zeros, 2 sets of 3 zeros. So when you see the word mills, divide that number by 1,000. When we use this version, we were dividing by 100 because it literally told us to per 100. When you see this version, I want you to think divide by 1,000, not 100. Now the percent key thing won't work with mills. That can't be the either or thing. You can't just hit the percent key and it's not going to work in your favor when it's a mill rate. You're going to have to divide by 1,000. So what happens if we take this 15 mils? Looking at that 15 mils is the same thing as back over here when we were looking at $1.50 per 100. There's something to do. Over here, we had to divide that $1.50 by 100. When we see 15 mils over here, we need to divide it by 1,000. And if we take 15 and divide it by 1,000, oh, wait a minute. You mean the decimal version of 15 mils is 0.015 and the decimal version of $1.50 per 100 is 0.015? That's handy. So if one town charges you taxes at $1.50 per $100, and another town charges you taxes based on 15 mils, they're charging you the same tax rate. Kind of interesting. That's kind of how that works, right? So, when you see the word mills, divide by 1,000, not 100. That's it. That's the only difference. Don't let mills freak you out. Just think 1,000 instead of 100. All right, so we've got our decimal version of mills, 0.015. Multiply it by 185.5. And in this case, the taxes annually are $2,782.50. That is your annual tax bill on a
Can I ask
property.
a question?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. When I do it, instead of doing that, does it matter if I divide the 185.5 by the 1,000 first
No,
and then multiply?
it
So it
doesn't.
doesn't really matter how you get it.
Anything down here at any point you can divide by 1,000.
Okay.
And you're good, even if you wait till you're at the very end of the problem, right? Because that would look like this. And that's why I like to point that out, because I could see in an actual test and you're stressed, you're trying to remember how, and you're plugging in numbers. I could see somebody forgetting to divide by 1,000. So don't worry about it. You don't have to like redo the whole problem or anything. 185.5 times 15 is a ridiculous number for annual taxes. Think, oh, no, I don't have to pay almost 3 million in annual taxes. Let's divide by 1,000. Oh, that looks better. That makes more sense. So yeah, you could theoretically, it would still work numerically, whether you divided this by 1,000 or this by 1,000, or just the total of them two together. It's all happened, all the same thing. Now, for those of you who just saw that and you're like, what? Ignore what we just talked about for the last 20 seconds. You do it the way we originally talked about it. Pick a way, pick a street. You're going to learn multiple ways to do the problems. You don't need to know all of the ways, just the one way that makes more sense for your mind, right? Because we all learn differently. So if all of that was nonsense, stick with the original thing. Now let's go back to this. Now this looks a little more, makes more sense. 15 mils divided by 1,000 is the same as $1.50 per 100. divided by 100. They're both a decimal number that is 0.015 right there. Now let's look at our mill rate calculation, 185.5 at a 15 mill rate. What's the annual tax bill? Well, let's convert that mill rate to a decimal. Divided by 1,000 gives us our decimal number of 0.015. And then there's our good old circle formula, the first one you're learning, and that's annual taxes is mill rate times assessed value. Plug it in, and there it is. That's what we just did. What about this? The assessed value is 75% of the market value. When I see assessed value, I think, oh, they mean tax value. The market value is $340,000. What is the assessed value? Okay, what's 75% times 340,000? $340,000 in the calculator times 75%. The tax value on that is going to be $255. There it is, plugged into a circle formula. Assessed value divided by 0.75, or sorry, I'm sorry, 340,000. Market value times 75% is 255. Because the market value times the percent is the assessed tax value. So we have an assessed value is 75% of the market value. Market value is 340,000. The rate is 13 mils. So therefore, what are the annual taxes? We'll plug our 13 mils in. We had converted it to a decimal by dividing the 13 by 1,000 to give us 0.013. Multiply it by that tax assessed value of 255 that we just calculated. And those two things in black multiplied together equals the thing in red. Your annual bill is $33.15. Are we good? It all looking like it should, making sense? Minimize my screen a bit. You need to, oh, am I cutting things off a little? Thank you. Is that better? Thank you. So the mill rate is just the number of mills divided by 1,000 to give you the right decimal that you need. Let's look at the same problem, but with dollars per hundred instead of the mill rate. We have the same 75% of market value. Market value is the 340. We have a tax rate of $1.30 per hundred. So what are the annual taxes? Plug in the 255 tax value times the decimal version of $1.30 per hundred. Oh, look, it's the same as the decimal version of 13 mils, right? And so it's the same answer because 13 mils is $1.30 per hundred. Because with $1.30 per hundred, you're just dividing by 100. With 13 mils, you're dividing by 1,000. $1.30 per hundred is the same as saying $1.30 and the percent sign, percent key, because that's what you're doing. You're dividing it by 100. Okay, look at this part. We have the tax value. We figured that out by taking a percentage of the market value. And then we know that the tax value times the tax rate equals the annual taxes. If you take those annual taxes, the amount of taxes you have to pay every year, how do we figure out what that would be if you had to pay them monthly? You just divide it by how many months are in a year. That turns into monthly taxes. What if instead of monthly taxes, you need to know how much are my taxes per day? Divide the annual taxes by 360. Oh, wait, what? 360, did we give up 5 days in the year and not tell anybody? For your purposes as a pre-licensing student, I have good news for you. The math is way easier if every month has 30 days. And so they let you do that. You're going to have to calculate things based on every month in the year having 30 days. And if every month in the year has 30 days, there's 12 months times 30 days. That means the year has 360 days. So for the purposes of doing your math calculations in this class, every month has 30 days and the whole year has 360 days. Now, when you get into your post-licensing class, post 302, you're back to real life, back to normal. You got to know that February might have 28 or 29, and that March has 31 and April has 30, etc. But for your purposes, every month has 30. That's why we just divided the annual taxes by 360 to get the daily taxes. And you'll need to know how to go to monthly and daily taxes when we get to the chapter on closing math, closing calculations for figuring out what the buyers bring into closing and what the seller will get from closing. Let's look at this one. The market value is 425,000. The tax value is 75% of that, and the tax rate is 13 mils. What is the annual tax in dollars? Take a moment and solve this as if it were an exam question. What's the first step? What'd you do first? We need to work with a tax value, don't we? It's probably the easiest thing to do first is find that assessed value, Shane. Yeah. We can find that by using the market value and whatever they give us as the percent of the market value. In this case, 425. %75 of that. 425 times 75% sign. The tax value we're working with should be 318,750. There it is. Next step, plug it into the circle formula or the regular algebra formula if that's the way your mind works better. That's fine. If you don't like this circle thing, that's okay. I'm always going to go to that because I think the people that struggle with math seem to like it. But that if you're strong enough to not like the circle formula, it probably means you're strong enough to overlook all that. You're just going to plug them into a nice linear algebra equation. And either one is fine. So if you are a circle person, we've got what? We've got 13 mils was the tax rate. So we're going to take that 13 mils, divide it by 1,000. That means 0.013 is a decimal number. Multiply it by this 318,750. So some of you have already said 4143.75. Oh, thank you, Danita. Very nice. You got it. Not so bad. Not as bad as it was 10 minutes ago, right? That's it. That is chapter 3. Move on. Questions? Chapter 4 is about transferring title, getting the title from one party to another. We're going to look at the methods of transferring title, the essential elements of a deed. Every deed should have these essential elements in it. The different types of deeds, you might have had fun reading the chapter about that because it got into things like special warranty deed and a general warranty deed. Then some more math, excise tax calculations. That's probably even easier than calculating the taxes, by the way. Excise tax. What is excise tax? We'll get into that. And then title insurance. There's insurance for everything. People can insure their feet and their hands if they're a guitar player, and their voices and their cars and their motorcycles and their houses. Title insurance is insurance for the title or the deed on your house. And we'll talk about why that's important. Another word, a fun legal term, the term for separating yourself from your property. Oh, that means selling it or giving it away. You no longer own it. It's called alienation. You're alienating yourself from your property because you're giving it away, you're selling it, probably selling it. So alienation, easy term. But we need to know, what is this thing that you're buying? You got to make sure that you're buying the right thing. Because if the wrong description is put into the contract and you go and close and sign the papers, what you bought might end up not being the thing you thought you bought. So it's important to describe it right. And the thing you need to look to in describing your property is the legal description. There are informal descriptions too. In fact, your street address is not a legal description. Testable question. Your street address is not one of the legal descriptions. It's nice, it's handy, it's on everything, including your closing statement and your deed and everything else, but it's not enough. It's got to have more to it than that. So the legal description is the exact description of your property. The street address is an informal method of describing your property. A legal description is required for your deed. It is an essential element for the deed. One of several, one of just a few, actually. Not very many essential elements to the deed. What different ways can you provide a legal description? If the street address is not one of them, what's the best one? They're different across the country. In North Carolina and the original 13 colonies all along the East Coast, by far the chosen method is what's called the meets and bounds method. Meets and bounds, more old words from the old world, right? Meets means distance, bounds means direction. Meets, how far are you going? Meters. Bounds, what direction are you going those 100 meters? Bounds is like degrees, like a compass. Northwest, 15 degrees northwest for 100 feet. And then turn left, go west, not turn left. They'll say, then go east 50 feet and then go south 213 feet. And that's all written out in a paragraph. It's literally written out like that. We're going to see that what are the requirements for the meets and bounds description. You've got to end up where you started. It's got to be a closed circle or closed shape. You can't just leave it open-ended because your property is not open-ended. It has definite boundaries all the way around the whole thing. Another adequate form of legal description is what's called referring to a previous or to a recorded plat map. A plat map is literally a map showing the streets and where all the lots in that area fall in relation to the streets and to each other. So it's a map of the lots of your neighborhood, referred to as lots and blocks. So it's like the neighborhood were divided up into blocks. Like here's the whole neighborhood. Let's make it kind of abnormal. And so this is block 1, and this is block 2, and this is block 3, and then this is block 4. So your house might be right here in this spot. You're in block 2. Block 2, and then within block 2, there are the lots have been kind of marked off. Let's say the street goes down the middle, and then here's some more lots. And let's say this was your house, so this was 13, lot number 13. So you live in block 2, lot 13. That's a lot in block number. Lot 2, block 13. And I live over here in block 4, and that lot number happens to be 37. So I live in block 4, lot 37, right? So that's referring to a recorded plat map. That plat map, as pretty as it is, has to be recorded at the courthouse, public record. Anytime you see the word recorded, something is recorded, what's the point of recording something? It's putting it on the public record. Now anybody can locate it. Anybody can see it. So all of the tax records are public record. The deed is public record. It's recorded. You could look up your friend's deed on their house or your enemy's deed. If you have somebody you don't like and you want to get all up in their business, go find their address, do a search under their name. You could look up the deed to their house. Not that that's going to help you in any particular way, but if you're just nosy, you're curious what they have going on, you can look up that deed. It's recorded. It's public information, right? Parcel ID is also an informal reference. That's a good question, Twee. Street address, parcel ID, they're nice, they're handy. We use them. In fact, the overarching rule is whatever you have to describe the property, put it in there. But it's not enough. The legal description is the only thing that's enough to be put on the deed. That's a requirement for the deed. And so it's either going to be the meets and bounds description or a reference to a plat map, or this last thing, a reference to another deed on the same property from before, a reference to a prior recorded deed. Because if the person before already did the work and recorded and nothing has changed, just refer back to that one. Say in the fine print, look for the deed number such and such from this, and that's the same description as it still is. Yeah, that'll make more sense, like Doug is saying there in the chat, when we send you and share with you the listing agreement on page 1. It says, what's this property you're listing? It'll have a street address blank, which is an informal reference, and the listing agreement will even say so. It'll say this isn't enough, informal, but here's the paragraph to put all the legal description information. It'll give you a place to put the lot and the block number. It'll give you a place for the subdivision name, if that is a thing, if there is a subdivision. It'll give you a place for the parcel ID number, Twee, but that's not enough. So it'll give you a reference place to put all of these different things. But any one of the three is enough. Do one of these three, either a meets and bounds description, reference to a plat map, or reference to a previously recorded deed. Anybody ever fly in a plane over the Midwest, like from here to California, and you look out the window and you see squares and rectangles? It's because of this. Because somebody had a brilliant idea, Thomas Jefferson, in fact, when the whole West was one, right? The West was expanded to, and all these pioneers were going out there, and he said, you know what, this whole meets and bounds is resulting in a lot of weird shapes. Anybody familiar with the shape of Virginia and North Carolina? All of our shapes, Maryland, they're weird, they're different, they're all kind of crazy. But you get out into the middle part and it's pretty blocky. The government rectangular survey system is not an adequate legal description for North Carolina, but it is out there. And that's why it could show up on the national portion of your exam. You do need to know a little bit about the government rectangular survey method because it could show up on the national section, but it won't show up in the local or the state section because we don't do that here in North Carolina. Government rectangular survey method involves marking things off into perfect squares. And we'll see what that means in a minute. And there it is. Meets and bounds, the primary method still used in the original colonies. Shows the boundaries written out in words. In fact, some of the older ones from 100 years ago look pretty funny. They'll say things like, start at the tree on the corner of the stream and the dirt road. They don't get to that level, but then go west 180 degrees west for 300 feet, turn left at the rock. It's actual physical monuments, the word called monuments, something that's immovable. I mean, rocks are movable, but back then, not so much. Nowadays, we don't really use rocks in streams as much. We use metal pins in the ground. Yeah, they could be pulled up, but for the most part, they're in there. They're not just going to blow away with the wind. So that meets and bounds description has a point of beginning. Where are we starting? The big rock, or the intersection of this road and that road, or the metal rod in the ground at this location. Monuments are those fixed objects. It could be the rod in the ground. It could be the rock or the tree or the this or the that to establish the boundary. And then the length, the distance you're going in is meets, and the direction you're going in is the boundaries, the bounds, meets and bounds. Here's what a simple one would look like. you'd be starting in this upper left corner, the point of beginning. You'd continue 250 degrees east, then you would go 250 feet east, then 500 feet south, and then 250 feet west, and then back north 500 feet, and you've made a square. You've made a perfect square, and you have ended where you began. That is a proper meets and bounds description. And if you wrote that out in a paragraph, kind of like what I just said, that is it. That's the meets and bounds description. That is a legal description. So testable items for this category, for this topic. What words are common words found in the meets and bounds method of describing real property? Point of beginning, point of ending, meets, bounds, monument, distance, direction, all those sorts of things. That's kind of the level of what you're expected to know here. Meets and bounds, monuments, point of beginning, point of ending. Now, getting away from those colonies out toward the middle in the yellow, if you can see it, okay. Government rectangular survey system. 1785 is when it was developed. And it was to help keep things organized as they settled in the West, in what was in the New West. We don't do it here. That is not an adequate legal description here. But here's what it looks like. The vertical lines that you see are the meridians and the range lines. Terms for vertical north and south running lines, meridians and ranges. The east and west, or I also maybe we'll call them horizontal lines, are baselines and tiers. Baselines and tiers, east and west. The word township, the whole point of using this government rectangular survey system was to identify and establish towns. Think of a favorite Western movie and think of the town. In the town, the township in this system is always 6 miles square. A square in the dimensions of 6 miles by 6 miles. I don't know why. You don't need to know why. That's just what it is. How big is a township with the government rectangular survey system? 6 miles by 6 miles. It's a square. And then it's divided into 1 mile sections. So 36 total sections. Looks like this. We've got a perfect square, hopefully. Close enough. There it is. We're dividing it into, let's see, I wonder if I can do this. Boom and boom and there's 4. It's not going to be even, but just pretend these were even. That's 4 and boom, and there. If those were even, perfect 1 mile by 1 mile squares like this. This is an actual square. You think it's a rectangle, but I'm telling you it's a square. It's this thing, and it's 1 mile by 1 mile. So 36 squares that are 1 mile by 1 mile equal 1 township. The whole thing is 6 miles by that way and 6 miles that way. And then these lines are meridians and ranges. And then these lines are tiers and baselines. Go this way. So 6 miles by 6 miles, 36 sections. If a section is 1 mile by 1 mile, tell me, let's make this a section now. 1 mile, 1 mile. How many feet are in a mile? Yes, Margie, 1 second, absolutely. Tell me how many feet are in a mile in the chat. You may not know. Most people don't need to know in day-to-day life. You just drive till the car tells you went a mile. Yeah, 5,280. 5,280 feet. That's how many feet a section is, because it's 1 mile. 1 mile equals 5,280 feet. And if it's that way on this side too, then what's the entire square miles of a section? Oh, my brain, you just made my brain hurt. 5,280 times 5,280. A lot. 27 million. I'm proving a point here. You don't need to worry too much about this at the moment. That's how many square feet are in a 1 mile square. Okay. Something else you need to know is how many square feet are in 1 acre. An acre. What's an acre? My grandpa knew what acres were. I don't need to know what an acre is. You do. How many square feet are in 1 acre? Anybody have any guesses? Another thing that you probably shouldn't have no reason to know. We're about to shed the light. An acre make a little side note here. 1 acre is 43,560 square feet. 1 acre is 43,560. How in the world do you ever remember that? There's a couple of ways. Some people remember it this way. 4 little old ladies are traveling 35 miles an hour in a 60-mile-an-hour zone. I like that method. It just sticks. 4 little old ladies going 35 and a 60. That's 43,560. You could also remember it this way. 4 plus 3 is 7, and 5 plus 6 plus 0 is 11. And then just remember the convenience store, 7-Eleven. I don't know. That one's a little more of a, maybe I might remember it that way. Just hammer it in your brain however you can. 1 acre is 43,560 square feet. So back here, when we determine the square feet of this 1 mile by 1 mile section, if we divide that by the number of square feet in one number of square feet in an acre, that tells us that one section has 640 acres. That's how much acres you had in one section in the government rectangular survey method. 1 mile by 1 mile equals, that's how we got this thing at the bottom. And that's why I just put you through that torment just now. So you could see why 1 mile by 1 mile square gives you 640 acres. We'll talk more about how to convert square feet to acres back and forth either direction, because that's something you're going to need to be able to do. But Margie, go ahead and share with us.
Okay, I have heard from many sources over the years that there's for sure going to be a couple of questions that I can pass on to you. And we've all heard this. So one of the questions is, which survey system, measuring system is not preferred in North Carolina? So all of you put that in the chat. Which one is not preferred in North Carolina? You want to tell them what it is, Neal?
Well, they got it. Did you see the chat?
Yep, they
Good
got
job.
it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, the other thing that I know for sure that you'll need to know is how many square feet are in an acre. And the final thing is how many square feet are in a mile. So if you have this right near you, open your reeling to page 16 and 17. Remember when Neal told you to be sure and use that booklet? Go to 16, page 16 and 17. Look down at chapter 4. Thank you, Neal. And how many questions are we going to have out of chapter 4? 4. Y'all see that? So everything that Neal's telling you is important, but try to pick out when he says, remember this, pay attention to this could be on the test. Pay attention to that And I know right now that just seems overwhelming because he says it a lot. But as you continue to study, this will all filter down a bit. It will get better. I promise you it'll get better. But before it gets better, it gets to be more stuff. So hang in there. Thanks, Neal.
Thank you. That was great. She makes a great point. So if in our experience as educators, especially Margie, we know that people seem to be seeing the questions like government rectangular versus meets and bounds, which one's not favored in North Carolina or some version of that. How many feet in a mile? How many square feet in an acre? If that's a high likelihood to be a question you see, well, out of 4 questions, well, not even 4 questions, because it's a combination of taxation, income taxation, which is chapter 28, or I'm sorry, 18, as well as chapter 4 combined are 4 questions on the national and none on the state. So probably going to need to know some of these things that when I'm pointing things out, those are probably going to be at least 1 or 2 of these 4, right? So just again, remain cognizant, remain aware of this chart. Keep it in mind. It kind of helps you not freak out a little bit. So the terms for the government rectangular survey system, and that section is 1 mile by 1 mile, and a township is 6 miles by 6 miles. So a section has how many acres? So if you're in the test and you can't remember, oh my gosh, what did he say? Was it 460? Was it 6,400? I don't remember, but I do remember a section is 1 mile by 1 mile. So maybe real quick, if you have some spare time, you could actually work it out and come up with the answer. Section is 1 mile by 1 mile. That's 5280 times 5280. That's 27 million and something. Divide by the feet in an acre. Right now that seems ridiculous, but you're going to know the feet in a mile and the square feet in an acre so well that this is actually a reasonable way to go ahead and get that question right. Do the math. And that's how we came up with the 640 acres in that 1 mile square. Here's what it looks like. The principal meridian is the middle one, that red one. The baseline is the middle one, the green one, horizontally. And then out from those goes the range lines and the tier lines. And so that's every town looks like that in a government rectangular survey system method. And then within this grid is one township. So these lines are just in the whole, all of the West. And then within the intersection of a meridian or range line and a baseline or tier line is a township. How big is a township? 6 miles square. So that little yellow square is a 6 mile square. And then if you zoom into that little township 6 mile square, here are your 36 sections of 1 mile squares. They look weirdly numbered here, don't they? Why are they numbered this way? We need to know that in this particular township, the section number 7 is this one on the far left, 1 notch down from the top. And the section 27 is this one down here in every township. Section 27 of every township is always this square. Section 16 in every township is always this square for that township. Why does that matter? Because another part of their brilliant plan was to put all the government services in one specific square of every town. So any town you go to using the government rectangular survey system, if you can find square number 16, section number 16, that's going to be where you'll find the courthouse and the school and any other government type of facility. That's the level of organization that they were seeking and trying to accomplish with this method. But back to this, why in the world did they start with 1 on the upper right and 36 at the lower right? I don't know. I know how I read books. I would have probably put the 1 here where the 6 is. And I think I would have probably ended up maybe with the 36 in the same spot. The way they do it though, for whatever reason, they started here in the upper right and they went over to 6. Why didn't they come back here and go 7 through 12? Because they went in the way that you plow a field. Of course, you were all thinking that because we all just plowed fields this past weekend, right? And that's what you do when you, and just think about it though, if you really were to plow a field, would you go all the way across the field, come all the way back like you're mowing grass, and then go out? No, you're going to go up, go over a little bit and come back. Some people who mow grass fancy go to great extra lengths so the lines look all pretty. I do it to be finished with it. And plus my yard is weeds and I don't care because I'm zoned industrial. I don't care. I'm spending my time and money on other things. And I should say my past client who I hired as a yard guy is, I don't care how he mows the grass, make it shorter so I don't have fleas and ticks and bugs and spiders and snakes. So in this government rectangular, they went down, they cut over the next block and they came back and over, back and over, just like that. And then, by the way, how big is an acre? Why is an acre as big as it is? Another old world kind of reasoning there is an acre is approximately as big as it takes one man to plow a field with one mule pulling one plow. One man and a mule and a plow can plow the entire field in a day. That's an acre. An acre can get plowed in a day with a mule and a plow by hand. Of course, duh, right? And then in real life, something that's actually useful besides that nonsense, if you're out there looking at a bunch of raw land and you have any sort of a concept of watching a football game, an acre is approximately the whole field minus the end zones. So if you can visualize a football field without the end zones and think, oh, that's like 1, 2, that's like 3 football fields side by side, not including end zones. So it's about 3 acres. Just rule of thumb, not a testable thing. Just while you're out there trying to figure out how big is this, that might be useful. What are the terms associated with the government rectangular survey system? Give me some of those terms or numbers. What did we just look at? Yeah, section, meridian, township, you got it. Baseline, nice. Ranges, what about a number? 36 sections, yeah. 6 miles square is a township. 1 mile square is, how many acres in a section? Acres in a section. 1 mile's 5280, that's good. 43,560 square feet in an acre. How many acres in one section? 640. Thank you, Eli. 640. Yep. Okay. So that's government rectangular survey method. Yep. Thank you, Doug. All of this is national testable material. You bet. There's also reference to a plat map and there's a reference to a prior recorded deed. They'll say, go look at this deed in this page, in this book and page number, because literally at the courthouse, there's an actual room with big old books that smell like mothballs and old books. And you can go pull that book off the shelf, open it up to the page 357, get book number 38 and turn it to page 357, and there's your property. It's a literal book and a page within that book. So this deed is located in that too. The deeds are located. Now, nowadays, you can do all that from where you're sitting right now. You can just search for book and page. It's still referenced as book and page, but it's a digital item. And you can do that if you look up pick the town of your choice, city, and look up GIS, like Concord, North Carolina GIS, or Concord, North Carolina Register of Deeds. You'll be able to find the search function for looking up deeds online, and you can see all that you want to see. So that's referring to a previously recorded deed, and this is referring to a recorded plat map. I kind of showed you a version of that. Here are the streets, here are the lots. The plat is the map showing where the boundaries and the lot locations are in a given subdivision. So this is Far Hills Estates, and let me see which one I can see better. It's kind of hard to see this, but see Wood Lane and Old Road right there? That whole block is called Block E. You can see it, it's in the rectangle there. Block E. And then all the lots are in this Block E. Lots, looks like 1 through 19, I believe, are in this block. Then over here in block L, it has lots 1 through 16. So the plat must be recorded at the courthouse. It's got to be legally recorded to be considered a legally accepted description. It cannot be a preliminary plat map. Sometimes in a new construction neighborhood, the developer, he will make, that's a great question, Ashley. Let me answer that in just a second. The developer will have it drawn up, have a preliminary plat map drawn up. And it's okay to go ahead and start selling lots using the preliminary plat map. But it is illegal for that developer to actually close on the sale of those lots until the plat map has been recorded. It's got to be recorded. It's got to be finalized, because you can't have a person who thinks they're buying number 17, and then that was only a preliminary and it got changed. And he thought he was buying 3 acres, which was lot 17, but that became 2 acres for some other reason. When it finally got finalized, obviously that'd be a big problem. So to close, it must be a recorded plat map. To sell the lot and get under contract, it's okay for it to be a preliminary. That's kind of why this matters and why we're talking about these things. The plat must be recorded to be a legally acceptable description. Now, how many acres does it take to build a subdivision? Well, that starts with what is a subdivision. So tell me in the chat, how many lots are in the minimum? How many minimum lots are in what would be considered a subdivision? What's the smallest number of lots that could be in a subdivision? It's probably a better way to ask it. Smallest number of lots for it to be called a subdivision. It is surprisingly little, a surprisingly small number. Think the smallest possible number that's not 1. Yeah, that's it, Eli, 2. The minute you divide a lot into 2 lots, now it's considered a subdivision. For our purposes, for legal purposes, 2 lots constitutes a subdivision. So how many acres does it take to build a subdivision? It all depends. My favorite answer. It depends on how the zoning is, for one thing. So is it in a part of the town or county where the minimum lot size is 2 acres? Then it's going to take 4, at least 4, because 2 lots constitutes a subdivision at the very lowest bare minimum, and it must have at least 2 acres per lot. So that's at least 4. So it all depends. Depends on the size of lots required, minimums. That's where zoning comes back around. Some parts of town where the townhouses are, for instance, they are zoned things like R10 or 20 units per acre. Sometimes is what that's talking about. Or out in the country where you see a nice, pretty big house, and then seems like forever to the next house, that's probably zoned like R1 or less, because you could have 1 acre lots or even bigger. Must be at least such and such size. In your Notion, if you go to Notion, I've added something just below the comments. You'll find homework from Monday. It's nothing official, nothing crazy. I made a Kahoot, and it's a review of chapter 2. And it's not something that all of you obviously will show up on at the same time. It's like the version where you can just kind of do it in your own time. It'll look like this when you click the link. And then you, if it asks you for a code, I gave you the code on the Notion. It looks like all it's going to do is take you right to it, and you can just pick a name. It'll assign the names arbitrarily, and then you just hit go, and then it'll just walk you through the quiz. I think it's like 19 questions. So it looks the same. It just doesn't have all the co-players, doesn't have me. You'll just do it in your own time. It is timed though. It's usually like 20, maybe 30 seconds each. And then this time you'll just click an answer, and it'll tell you whether it's right or wrong. So it's that idea. So it should be kind of a fun way to get some review time done. Try to do that for Monday. Also, we're just continuing in order. I'd probably try to do some math practice, see what they have in the backs of those chapters, and do the tax calculation math. And then along the way, make sure you're keeping a page in your journal of any questions, anything. Ask me so that you don't have to deep dive. And if you run across any sort of study aid or study guide that's helpful, share it with us. Number one, to make sure that it's something that's telling you the right thing. Number two, if it's a good one, so everyone else can benefit from it. Okay. All right, we just talked about a recorded plat map. And so here's where lot 7 is in this block E of Far Hills Estates. So that's how that works. Those are all the legal methods. The informal references are things that you're used to seeing, but they are officially not good enough for a deed, but they're still important. And in real life, you'll put these on the contract and on the listing agreement too. Even though they are informal, it's still useful to have a tax parcel ID number or a street address, although they're not a legal description. And just a little note here, the city name in the street address doesn't tell you more than just where the post office is, right? So it's not about the property, it's just an informal reference. We use a survey to figure out more than just how big a lot is. The survey verifies the dimensions, sure, and the shape of things. It also identifies easements and encroachments, as we looked at before. Hugely important. Got to make sure you always are on record in writing that you told them to get a survey or advise them to get a survey. They can say no, you can't make them, they don't have to get one, but you don't want to be the person that didn't tell them not to. You don't want to be the person that did tell them not to. You want to make sure that you always tell them to do so. It is a legal document, and therefore it's real tempting to pull out that little survey and get your business card and make a little notch on your card that equals like 10 feet and help them lay out where their fence should go on the survey. Avoid the temptation. I know that it seems to make sense. It's easy, it's fun, but you're not a surveyor. You're not an attorney. Therefore, you're not allowed to interpret the survey. If you give them any sort of expertise or any sort of information based on reading this survey, that is not for you to do. Here's the survey. What does it mean? Oh, you have questions? Tell me your questions. We'll talk to the surveyor or we'll talk to the closing attorney. Don't you give them any answers to that survey, because that would be outside of your expertise. Stay in your lane. That's what that's talking about. Unless you're a surveyor or an attorney, don't help them interpret the survey. So the title to your car is the thing that tells people that you own the car. That's how you prove to the person you're selling it to that you're the one that can sell it to them. The title to your house, same idea. It's called the deed. The deed is the title to your house. It conveys your rights of ownership, that bundle of legal rights, over to the person that's buying it. It's evidence of the title to the real estate. It's your written evidence saying, yep, I'm the owner. It allows for recovery or retention of ownership. You can pull that out and say, yes, see here. You don't even have to pull that out. You can just say, go look it up, because it's public record. The deed is available publicly. You can see the deed for my house. You can see the deed for your neighbor's house or your uncle's house. It's public record. Okay, now we're getting into some legal terminology that is what constitutes the deed having been conveyed or handed over. Title transfers to the new owner when the deed is delivered to them, but also accepted by them. You can't just leave it in the box by the door and consider that transferred. It has to have been voluntarily accepted by them as well. So the title of the property transfers when that deed is both delivered to the new buyer and voluntarily accepted by the new buyer. There's a nuance about this. In North Carolina, this will show up on your state exam, your state portion. A deed is considered having been accepted when it has been recorded at the courthouse. In fact, we're really not advised to give the keys to the new buyer until the attorney has recorded the deed at the courthouse. Anybody ever close on a house and you had to wait a couple hours before you could get the keys? Or have you ever heard of that? It's because of this. In fact, when HGTV, you're popping the champagne bottles because you just got to the attorney's office, you haven't even signed the papers. They are very pre-celebratory on that show. But in real life, you go to the attorney's office, you sign the papers, and the attorney says, okay, seller, in a couple of hours, maybe later this afternoon, you can come back and get your proceeds check. And if you're the broker and you haven't prepared them for that, they might be upset. What? I just signed my house away. I want my money now. It's not how it works. A couple things still have to be done. The closing papers have been signed, but now they need to be sent to the buyer's new lender so the lender can look over everything, make sure they're happy. That lender hopefully has already sent the money to the attorney's account and funded the loan, but maybe they haven't. If things are backed up, they might not have sent the money over yet, wired it over. So that's going to take time. At the very least, all of that has to be done. And then the attorney can electronically or physically in person record the deed. Even when they do deed recording electronically, they log in, they log into the Register of Deeds office, and they have to get in a physical queue, like an actual line online. They can't just hit the button. Like you could go to Amazon and we could all buy gummy bears on Amazon at the same time. I don't have to wait for Eli. He doesn't have to wait for Jennifer. We can just do it simultaneously, but not the way when you're recording a deed. If me and Eli and Jennifer are recording deeds, we're all paralegals. If she gets onto the site first, she's ahead of the other two of us. Then he's next and he's right behind her. So keep in mind, there's an actual physical person on the other end of this thing that has to do some stuff. Once they're done with her, they're going to work on his file. Then they're going to work on my file. I'm the paralegal. I'm sending my stuff in. And if I'm the paralegal for your closing and you're the buyer, you're waiting, right? So the seller doesn't get their money until the deed is recorded. Well, if you're a seller and you're not getting your money until the deed is recorded, and it's not going to be recorded for 3 more hours, are you going to be happy to give the keys to the buyer yet? You're not getting any money. They don't get any keys. Now, sometimes people are like, whatever. I'm sure it's going to be fine. Yeah, you can have the keys because the buyer has all their stuff on a truck and it's in the parking lot of the attorney and blah, 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 whatever. But you as a broker need to go on record and say, officially, I don't advise you do this, because what if they go to record the deed at the courthouse and then they find out some other mechanic's lien has been placed on the property in the last 3 days since the attorney looked at the file the last time? The attorney's going to do a title search, but that doesn't mean that there could still be liens that get filed against the property all the way up to the last minute. That's why before they record that deed at the closing day, they do one more real quick check. Let's make sure nobody filed another lien in the last few minutes. Okay, now it's recorded. No more liens, good. Pull the trigger, record. Okay, then he'll call they'll email everybody and say, okay, we're on record. We have recorded. It's safe to give the keys to the new buyer. Now the seller can come pick up their proceeds check, their $18,000 proceed check or $180,000, whatever it is. And oh, by the way, who's the last person to get their check? You and me. Brokers can now come get their checks. Keys can be released. Money can be released to everybody. Thank you. Is the survey recorded? No. Survey recorded, not required. So it might be. Plat map needs to be recorded so that the developer can actually close on the property, but any survey that anybody randomly gets done, not necessarily recorded. I do remember it. Shane said, our plat map's always drawn to scale. I think so. It's not something you'll be tested on, but yeah, I believe they're going to show the little scale in the corner and say, this is how big this thing actually is. And they'll show you. If it's an official recorded plat map, it's going to be done by an actual surveyor. And that's the way they do that. I hope that's the answer. I hope that's the question you were meant for me to answer. So in North Carolina, it's all about recording that deed. That's when acceptance has occurred. Sometimes the closing is going to be on Friday. And it was supposed to be Friday morning, but the lender was behind or somebody was late. And so it got bumped to Friday afternoon. And let's say closing became 3:30 on Friday afternoon. Well, it takes about an hour for all these papers to get signed. And just between you and me, in real life, in the wild, all of these government offices that record things, the Register of Deeds office, I should say, they're done at 4. If your closing is not finished by 4, so that you can get online and try to register or go down there, if you're not able to register to record the deed by 4, it's not closing on Friday. But everything was signed. That's why people talk about, well, we signed the papers, but we're not moving in until Monday. It's another term called, it's a dry closing. You signed all the papers, but it couldn't get recorded in time, and therefore can't record till Monday morning. Now, as a broker, we have a lot of important talks with our client. Okay, it didn't record. Are we going to let the buyer have their keys? All their stuff's on the truck. They want to just move in. Sometimes the buyer says, could we at least have access to the garage? Can we just put it in the garage? The thing is, if they have a celebratory bonfire and burn the whole place down, whose insurance is covering it? So yes, the parties could agree to let the buyer go ahead and move in over the weekend, but let's make sure that they know the ups and downs, the possible downsides, and also let's make sure that it remains covered insurance-wise. Don't let that seller cancel their policy on Friday like they were gonna, because they weren't going to be the owner on after Friday originally, but now they are. They're still going to be the owner for 2 more days until it records on Monday. Therefore, keep your insurance policy in place in case the worst possible thing happens. And hey, buyer, they're going to let you move in over the weekend. Good for you. Congratulations. You need a tenant's policy. You were lined up to have an owner's policy. Now you need to call your insurance company and say, hey, real quick, let me get some tenants insurance coverage for the next 2 days, because all I am for 2 days is a tenant that covers my personal property. Those little nuances are important. You've got to make sure that you as a broker advise them, look, first of all, I say probably wise just to not do this, but if you insist, make sure the insurance coverage is proper and adequate, and know that there's a worst case scenario here, and here's what it is. But if they agree to do whatever, it's their business. You just want to make sure you have it in writing that you told them what the possible downsides were. Some more terminology. We talked about alienation, separating yourself, alienating yourself from the property. That's selling it or transferring it or giving it away. When you do it voluntarily, so voluntary alienation means you're either selling it or giving it away. You did it on purpose. You were happy about it. Involuntary alienation means somebody is taking it away from you. Somebody is requiring you to be separated from it. Court action, foreclosure, liens that result in you losing the property, tax liens that result in foreclosure so that you lose the property would be involuntary alienation. When it comes to that whole concept of somebody dying, the executor of an estate, executor is the one who carries out the provisions of the will or do the business of settling the estate. And executor historically would be the man. If it's a woman, it'd be the executrix. You might see a question with the word executrix, same thing. Executor of a estate. I would imagine in this day and age, they would call both the executor. They carry out the provisions of the deceased and also the business of getting even if the deceased has no rules or guidelines, or they never got a will done, the executor is the one who's in charge of getting it all settled. Probate is that legal process of settling a deceased person's assets and estate. And you can remember, you can avoid the probate process if you have the real estate in a trust. You could go around that legally. The beneficiary is the one who gets the property. If someone leaves the property to someone else, the beneficiary is the one who gets it. Just like the beneficiary of a trust account or a trust is the one who gets whatever's in that trust. When you die without a will, you don't have a will and you die, it's what's called intestate. The word intestate you need to know for the test is dying without a will. You die intestate, there's no will. Why does that matter? Because in North Carolina, if you die without a will and you also have no heirs, the state of North Carolina gets your property through the process that's called escheat, E-S-C-H-E-A-T. So intestate means dying without a will. That is a version of involuntary alienation. When you die and you have a will in place, that's voluntary alienation because you told them what you wanted to do with it. You told them, here's what my wishes are and intentions for my property when I die. Because voluntary means you chose, you made the choice. You either chose to sell it or you chose to give it away. Involuntary is against your wishes. Court ordered it because of some outcome of a legal matter. Foreclosure. When you buy that house subject to a loan, because probably for most people, that's the only way they can buy the house is using a loan. Therefore, the lender says, yeah, okay, as long as you keep making those monthly payments, you can keep the house. There's a provision in the mortgage, or in North Carolina, it's called a deed of trust. And it's basically that whole document is pretty much summed up in this phrase: if you don't pay, you don't stay. You got to keep making that mortgage payment or you got to go away. We keep it. We take your house from you. You told us we could because you signed that deed of trust back when you bought it. The lien holder takes it to pay off the debts that are owed. We know about adverse possession already. That's that weird thing with the acronym OCEAN. Now, like, ever heard of Area 51? Some of those places out in the Midwest where aliens are kept. That's where we keep our aliens. The ones that fell to Earth, we put them under the ground in the bunker. Those large tracts of hundreds of thousands of government acres, if you own land beside them, guess what? Don't get fancy ideas about using adverse possession to, in 20 years, somehow claim 100,000 government acres. Not allowed. The government property is exempt from adverse possession. We said it was for 20 years. There's a little caveat to that. If it's property that has no cloud on the title, no issues with the title, then you'd have to do this adverse possession OCEAN acronym openly, continuously, exclusively, adversely, and notoriously. I believe I had them all for 20 years continuously in order to have a shot at getting adverse possession given to you. But if it's a property that has a cloud on the title, it could be only 7 years that you need to do all these things and have a shot at actually getting the property. Squatting your way to the property, in other words. There's our acronym. And then here's the word for when the government takes the property because you had no will or heirs. Escheat. Reversionary right. It reverts to the government. Will and has no heirs. It's a North Carolina thing. That'll show up in the North Carolina exam or the North Carolina portion. Eminent domain, we talked about that in the word condemnation. The government condemns the property through eminent domain. It's got to be for the good of the public. They can't just do it because they want to build a government exercise facility for all the government employees, right? They can't do it just for their own good. It's got to be for the good of the public. And they can't just take it for no money. They've got to fairly compensate the owners. The definition of fair compensation is probably different in the eyes of the owner versus the government, but they come up with some sort of a fair market value number, and that's what is given to the owner. And then the owner has access to due process in this thing. They could plead their case, but it is actually a process involved, and letters in the mail and being compensated, and it's got to be justifiably for the public good. There was an example in North Carolina where, like, a development, some fancy shopping mall development or something, tried to do eminent domain because basically for profit. But it was eventually ruled that no, we're just not going to do it that way here. So it's always got to be for the public good. It can't be for the profit of a corporation. It's got to be for the public good. Okay, essential elements of a deed. We're going to learn some V words: valid, void and voidable later. But a valid deed, obviously out of those three words, it wouldn't take advanced study to understand valid is the best choice. You want it to be valid. A valid driver's license, right? Valid. So valid deed, essential elements of a valid deed must be in writing, must be legal capacity of the people involved. The grantor, the one who is giving the property or selling the property, must know what they're doing, of sound mind. And then both parties, seller and buyer, grantor and grantee of this deed, must be identified on the deed. The deed needs to have the names of the parties who are doing this transfer. And the property needs to be identified legally, legal description. Adequately identified means a legal description. And then the deed needs to have words of conveyance, adequate words of conveyance. It needs to have in it what the intentions are. Here's what we're doing. This Joe Blow is selling to Jane Doe under these terms. So adequate words of conveyance. Those are legal words. We let the attorneys handle that. The attorney is who draws up the deed. We don't do that. We could see the deed, we could look it up, we could learn from it, but it's the attorney that's going to make that deed and write it based upon what is outlined in the contract. We send the attorney, the closing attorney, we as brokers send them the contract that was signed between the buyer and seller. And then the attorney uses that contract to know what was agreed upon and then writes the deed based on the contract. So I'm going to steal a question from a future chapter. I think we'll probably be getting to this on Monday. Based on what I just shared with you, which document is more important? The deed or the contract? In the chat, which one officially would be more important, deed or contract? What do we use to write the deed, though? The attorney needs to look at a document to figure out what to put on the deed. A case could be made that it's actually the contract that's the most important thing, right? We always think, and I ask that for that purpose, because it's so easy to think, oh, deed sounds more important. But what informs the deed? The contract informs the deed. It's how does the attorney know what to put on the deed? By reading the contract. That's the promise between the parties. The promises, the multiple promises between the parties is what's outlined in the contract, and that's what they use to write the deed. And then here's another testable question. Who signs the deed? Tell me in the chat, who signs the deed? It's not both. Both do not sign the deed. Who signs the title to the car when you sell your car? Does the buyer sign the title to the car? I don't think so. Just the seller. So the seller or the grantor is the one who signs the deed. That's it. And then that deed must be both delivered and voluntarily accepted, meaning recorded. The grantee does not sign the deed. These are the essential elements. I'd take a screenshot of this. These are the essential elements of a deed. I'm going to add it to Notion just for fun, but you do it too. Essential elements, mark it in your book, essential elements. Just because, keep in mind, just because something would be a good idea to be on the deed or in the deed, doesn't mean that it is an essential element. There are some things that would probably be a great idea to have in that deed above and beyond these things that don't have to be. Here are the non-essential elements of a deed, and then we'll call it a day. Non-essential elements of a deed. Now, also keep in mind, these are all probably on the deed and in it, right? Doesn't have to be, but it probably should be dated. It's non-essential element. Doesn't have to be, probably should be witnessed. Recorded. Being recorded is a non-essential element of a deed. That's kind of weird because we just saw that delivered and voluntarily accepted is an essential element. But remember, in North Carolina, accepted does kind of mean recorded. So some of this stuff overlaps national portion versus state portion. So sometimes things look a little weird because you're answering it on the national portion of the exam. But in North Carolina, we do need to record it. It is required that it be recorded. But officially, for your purposes of this test, recording is a non-essential element of a deed. Being acknowledged by a notary public, like some third party who says, yep, looks like everybody signed. I stamp it. I acknowledge that I watched you sign it. It doesn't have to happen. Notarization, non-essential. And the exact amount of consideration on the deed, it won't say what you paid for it. It'll say something else. It'll say something called revenue stamps or excise tax, which is a formula based on what you paid for it, but it doesn't have to have the exact amount of consideration. How much you paid for it is probably not on the deed. And then it doesn't have to be sealed. Sealed, when I see that, when you see that, think of any sort of medieval era movie you've ever watched where the king melts the wax on the scroll and puts his ring in it, and now it's been sealed, so that when it gets to the other end of the world through horseback and everything else, that person receiving it can see, yeah, the seal's unbroken. Nobody has read this, and they can break it and see what was intended for them and no one else. Well, that has morphed into the word seal. Sometimes you'll see in a legal document the word seal in parentheses. Now it doesn't matter. Used to be, attorneys would say, please don't sign your signature and go over the word seal. I'll have to reprint everything. None of that is as important anymore. The word seal is not an essential element of the deed.